Okay, so today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Ayim Vav, Yevamos 76. So let's say you were punctured and then you were closed. Anything. So basically, we want to know if the man is going to be, or Yevamos 76 say, you want to know if the man is going to be disqualified as a Krushivcha. So the lav kosher. So what does it mean? So if he has, when he puts forth seed, if the hole became closed up, when he puts forth seed, it tears again, is disqualified. Otherwise, it's kosher. So Rava, so Rava asked him the question: how is this the case? Where is the puncture? If we say it's a matamei Torah, it's on below the crown, meaning to say, if the erva is hanging downwards and it's on like that part of the atara, that part of the crown that when it's hanging down, which is like at the tip, or the top part of the erva, if that's where it is, that could be even severed and it's not a problem. Must be alabatara atzma. Must be on the atara itself, the crown of the erva itself. That's the issue. So the Gemara says. If it is Nike Batara Atzma, that if it was punctured on the crown itself, the Nistam, and then it became closed up, anyway, it's place where it is, he has seed and it's torn, is disqualified. Otherwise, it's kosher. So that's the basic idea, that if this man's seed will tear the hole that was closed up, then he can't marry a woman. But now we have the question. The question is, how do you test this? Because the man can't get married to her if it's still going to be a Patsua Daka, if he's still going to be torn, if it's still going to tear, because the Patsua Daka is not allowed to get married. But how can you test to see if he's capable of getting married to her? So Shalach Rava Brei de Rava or Rav Yosef. So Rava sent a question to Rav Yosef. Rava, the son of Rabba, sent a question to Rav Yosef. Tell us, how do we test whether or not he's a Krushivcha, not whether or not his seed will tear the hole when he ejaculates. So he says, I'll tell you how you do it. We don't want to do chas v'shalom manipulation with your hands, because that's a ma'aseh niyuf, that's a lewd act, and that's prohibited. So even though it's for a mitzvah, for the purpose of getting married, which is a mitzvah, still we have a problem. So they do something indirect. He suggests, this was apparently a method that they were aware of back then, that they would put some warm barley bread on his anus, and that will cause him to ejaculate, and we'll see if the hole will tear. I don't know if that will work these days. Well, a lot of things that we say nishtana atefa, we say the human nature has changed. So maybe the human nature has changed in this respect also. So it says Abaye Yaakov Avinu Avi Tzivei Kochi Roshis Oni Shelo Rai Kerem Yamav. You say, you think everybody's like Yaakov, that Yaakov Avinu never had carry in his whole life? You think everybody is so pure that that's the only way that they could get seed out of their body, by putting warm barley? No, that's too much. You're going to too much of a degree. So what does Abaye say? Amar Abaye Mavrinan Kamei. Abaye says, all you do is you bring in front of him big day tzivonin. You bring in front of him some barley, some colored clothing of a woman. Meaning, say, and commentaries point out, it has to be a woman he doesn't know, because otherwise it's too much of a rude activity. And when he sees this colored clothing of a woman, then he gets excited and he's going to ejaculate. So I'm a Rabba Atakui, I'm a Barzilai Agiladi. You think everybody's Barzilai Agiladi? Barzilai Agiladi, well, Rashi tells us, was a person who was shut of bezima, who was immersed in this sexuality, and that's why he became old too early. If you were immersed in sexual sins, you're going to become old prematurely, and you lose your sense of taste. So, meaning to say, this was like the corona of those days, that if you were shut of bezima, you would lose your sense of taste. You think everybody's like Barzilai Giladi, who's so immersed and he just sees a garment he's going to have an ejaculation. No, it's like we saw at first approach. You put the warm barley bread on the man, and that will cause him to have an emission, and we'll see if it will tear. Obviously, the Talmud's approach is relevant today for all the cases where we need the man to ejaculate, but not into the woman because we want to fertilize the egg. So the question is, how was it done? And Ramosha Feinstein already back in the 50s was being asked questions like this. So if ever anybody's in a situation like that, you have to discuss it very carefully with a posek to see what's the permitted way to do it. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Nikei Pasol that if he has a hole in his erva, then he's disqualified with Nesha who shoses, because then the seed is going to just like dribble out. It's not going to shoot forth. Rashi says Yora Kachetz, that we learn in Gemara Chagiga that the only way the zera is able to impregnate a woman is if it shoots forth like an arrow. If it doesn't shoot forth like an arrow, it's not good enough. So therefore, if it shows he's disqualified. But if it's closed up, he's kosher. Because then he's able to have father children. This is called a disqualification. He could be temporarily disqualified, but if the hole gets filled up, he's kosher. What do you mean? This case is a type of a hole that can be properly sealed. What is it? What to exclude? What to exclude? Krum. Let's say you have a membrane. She'awa machmas maka bereya. There ain't no krum. So let's say you had a hole in the lung, and then you had a membrane, a scab that went over it. That's not going to be considered a sufficient sealing of the hole in the lung, and therefore the animal is still considered treif. That's not going to be enough of a seal. So what do we do in this situation? Let's say you have a hole in the male erva. How do we close up the hole? What do we do? You bring a kernel of barley, you scratch the man's erva, and then you bring some fat, and we rub it on there, and to basically lubricate it. And then what do you do? Mycinan shumshaman gamwa. You bring an ant. Rashi says shumshaman gamwa. Rashi says here. Rashi says Namala Gadol. You bring a large ant. And what do? You place the head of the ant in the hole. And that's going to cause the ant to bite. And basically, at that point, the head of the ant will get trapped in the hole. This is where they did surgery. His head will come off. And that's how you're going to close up the hole. And then the heel, and then the wound will be healed. Yeah, and this was their method of surgery. So the Gemara says, the dafka sa'arta, specifically if it's a barley kernel, but if it will be steel, mizrav zarf. If it will be steel, it will make a wound, and so you can't do that. Okay, so fine. And that is, most people say if it's a small hole, it works. Some people say it means if it's a minor child. But if it's a large hole, it'll be folded over, and you won't be able to fill up the hole in this manner. They had surgery back then. The problem was they didn't have anesthesia. So anesthesia was surgery's best friend. So once you have anesthesia, you can do real surgery. But this was like their method, and they didn't have the tools. This must have been a very good way of covering up a wound in a body, was using an insect to cover it up. Anyway, I'm a Rabbi Barafuna. That somebody who urinates through two holes is disqualified. Presumably, that what they're talking about here was, because we saw the reference in this on the bottom of Ayin Hema Beis, was something which doesn't really work in our bodies today. But they thought that there was one hole to urinate and another hole to ejaculate the seed. But now they're saying, let's say you urinate through both holes. We today believe through our biology that it's only through one hole. But so we say nishtana teva, the human nature has changed. But anyway, if you urinate through two holes, you're disqualified. Amarava, So Rava says the law is not like the son. Here, Rava Rafuna says if you urinate through 2 holes, you're disqualified. Below Ka'aba, and it's not like the father. The son Hada Amran, like that which we stated, meaning say if you urinate through 2 holes, you're still okay. You're not disqualified because at least you'll still have the seed coming out through one of the holes. You can impregnate. And what about the father? What did the father say, which is no good? The Amar Abakuna, the Rafuna said, Nashim hamasolos zubazu, women who are misolos. Rashi says women who engage derech tashmish zachar nekeva, that they act with each other like a man and woman act during intercourse. If they rub their genitalia against each other. So women who do this, basically what we would call gay women, Rafuna said are psuos l'kahuna. They're disqualified for the kahuna. Meaning to say, what disqualifies you from the kahuna? If you are engaged in lewd behavior, like a znus. So Rav Huna said this will disqualify you. And even according to, and so we don't rule like that position of Rav Huna. We say that these women are not disqualified for the kahuna because we don't call this actual znus. Znus is lewd behavior. And even according to Rabbi Lazar, he says that if a single man and a single woman have intercourse, not for the purpose of getting married, that's a zona. Hanimili ish, that refers only to a man. Avo isha, but with another woman, pritusa ba'ama. It's called just pritus. And pritus, so it's less lewd behavior than premarital intercourse, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. What is pritusa ba'ama? Pritusa ba'ama is not saying it's permitted, but it's saying there's not a biblical prohibition, and perhaps not even a rabbinic prohibition. It's called pritzusa ba'alma. So it certainly does not disqualify her from being with a Kohen, and that's the ruling. So this is Rabbi, one of the, yes?
But Rabbi Elazar's ruling was related to an unmarried man and an unmarried woman. How did they extend that to a man with a man?
No, there's no such, it doesn't talk at all about a man with a man. There's nothing here that's talking about a man with a man.
Oh, so it's saying a woman with a man or whatever. And then
Rabbi Lazar says that a woman with a man is going to be disqualified to be with a Kohen because she engaged in premarital intercourse, and that makes her a zona. We don't rule like that position of Rabbi Lazar, but we're saying not these women. We're saying that these women not only are they not disqualified for the kahuna, according to the way we paskin, that they're not zonas, but even according to Rabbi Lazar, who says that there would be a zona if they engage in intercourse, even that we're going to say they're not going to be a zona, even according to Rabbi Lazar, because this is pritzusa ba'alma, doesn't rise even to the level of znus. So that's the ruling of the Gemara about the homosexuality of women. I know people have questions. We'll address them at the end now. I'm sure. Hold your questions, and we'll get to it at the end. So we say Petzua Daka Ukru Shafcha. Let's say you're Petzua Daka. Let's say you have a wounded testicle, Ukru Shafcha, or if your member was severed. Mutarim Bigiores, they are allowed to marry a convert, a woman who converted, and Mushukreres, and a freed female slave. Ve'ena Nasur and Elami Lavobakal. The only women they're prohibited to are women who otherwise they're only prohibited to like people who are born Jewish, as it says. They cannot marry the Kahal Hashem, people who are considered part of Kahal, but these people who are born in a way that they were not part of the Kahal, they can't. There's no prohibition for the Petzua Daka or the Kruz Shafcha to marry such people. So Ba'ami name Rav Sheshes. So they asked the question from Rav Sheshes. Petzua Daka Kohen Ma'al B'Gioros Meshachreres. What about a Kohen who's Petzua Daka? A Kohen who's Petzua Daka is not allowed to get married, but is he allowed to marry Gioros Meshachreres? Do we say that a Kohen is not allowed to marry a convert? So is this Kohen who's Petzua Daka allowed to marry a convert? Do we say Piktusha Sekai? He retains his holiness as a Kohen, so he can't marry her. Odoma, but now we say because he's a Petzua Daka, he lost his holiness. Misharin, he can marry her. Amoy Rav Sheshes Tinitua. So Rav Sheshes says, we learned this in a brisa. What does the brisa say? Petzua Daka Yisrael Mutar Benasina. That the Petzua Daka, a wounded person amongst the regular Israelites, is allowed to marry an Asina. The Nesina, we're going to spend a few time, we're going to spend some time on over the next few days. They appear 3 times in history with Moses, with Joshua, and with David. And we'll see how that they were people who were not allowed to marry into the community. So we say a Petzua Daka can marry a Nesina. How can you marry them? If you say you retain your holiness, how can you marry the Nesina? You said you're not allowed to marry the Canaanites. So we see from here that you don't retain their holiness and you can marry them. So also the Kohen can marry the convert. Amarava, no. You think that the reason why they're not allowed to Nesina and then they are is because it depends upon your holiness? No, we're worried there. Dilma Moed Ben. We're worried that if you marry these Canaanites, you're going to have or the Nesinim, you're going to give birth to a child. And your grandson is going to start worshiping Avodah Zarah, idolatry. And that's only when they're idolaters. But when they convert, be Yisrael, Sharo. So then, when they converted, the rabbis would allow them to marry a regular Jew. And the rabbi said you can't marry them even after they convert. And when the rabbis made the decree, who they make the decree against? Only against those people, only those people who are capable of having children. But these people, this Petzua Daka, he can't have children. The Rab Bar Alude, he's not able to have children. They said you can marry the Canaanite, the Nesinim. So if that's the case, the Gemara says, Mamzer Debar Alude, Achinamidasher. So a Mamzer who is capable of having children, you should say, is not allowed to marry a Nasin. But we learned the Mamzer and Nesinim but we say a Mamzer can marry one of these Canaanite nations. So the Gemara says, you know what? The rabbis made the decree that a person who's not a disqualified man cannot marry. But Pesulim or Gazer Rabbanim. But the disqualified people, it's so uncommon that they said you can marry them. The decree doesn't apply to them. Hadar Amarava, Rav Milsahi. Rava then says, no, you know what? That's not the case. He says the whole discussion was based upon the false premise. When they were idolaters, they didn't even have this concept of marriage. The whole concept by Jewish law of marriage is when you have 2 Jews, but you have the idolater, it's not this concept of marriage. So Niskairu Islahu Chamus, but only once they convert is this concept of marriage. And so therefore, the verse that says you're not allowed to marry them refers to after they converted, and it's because of Kedusha. And from the fact that the Petzua Daka is allowed to marry a Nesina, we see he doesn't retain his holiness. And so therefore a Kohen who's a Petzua Daka who's got a wounded erva, he can marry a convert because he doesn't retain his holiness. So Rav Yosef asked a tremendous question. Must have Rav Yosef Vayisrate and Shlomo as Paspar Melch Mitzrayim. It says that Shlomo married the daughter of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. How did he marry her? Giuri Giyaira. So how did he marry her? How did he marry her? If you're saying that she's from the nations of the world, and it's not a marriage. You said that Rabbi said there's no such thing as marriage between the Jew and the idolater. Here, it says in the verse, he married her. The Gemara says, Giuri Giyaira. No, she converted. The Gemara says, it can't be that she converted. They didn't accept converts in the time of Solomon and David. So how did you convert? The Gemara says, no, what's the reason why they didn't accept converts? The whole reason why they didn't accept converts was because they kept thinking, oh, David's in charge, Solomon's in charge. They want to just be a seat at our table. And so therefore, for that reason, she didn't need a seat at the king's table. She was a queen already, or a princess. The Gemara says, but typically, anyway, you shouldn't have been able to marry her. She was a first generation Egyptian, and you're not allowed to marry an Egyptian until the 3rd generation. And if you want to say, well, these are not the same Egyptians that the Torah prohibits Egyptians. This is not the same Egyptian. That they went somewhere else. But we have a case. We're going to get to this brisa later on. It states that Rabbi Yehuda says, I was studying in the yeshiva with Minyamin Ger Mitzri. I was studying with Minyamin. He was a convert from the Egyptians. And we were studying with Rabbi Akiva, and he said to me, I need Mitzri Rishon. I'm first generation. When Asati Mitzri Rishon, I married another first generation Egyptian. Asi with me, Mitzri Shni. I married my son to a 2nd generation Egyptian. So my grandson can come into the community. So we see from here that it is the same Egyptians. Amar Papa, Anam Shlomo, Leiku, V'Nesif. You want to bring me a proof from Shlomo? Shlomo lo nasim midi. Shlomo didn't marry anybody. He really didn't marry her. Dechsiv bei min agayim asher amar shama b'nei Yisrael lo tavo b'hem v'im lo yavo b'chem. Achei yatu asel v'avchem achrei Eloheim b'hem devach Shlomo la'ava. It says in the verse that Shlomo was with these women out of love. It's meaning to say that he didn't marry them. He was just with them out of love. This was not, Shlomo Melech is a tremendous tzaddik beyond their comprehension, but it seems to be that he was with these foreign women out of love, and that must have caused him to sin. Ella kasher v'yischatein, but it says that Solomon married them, so it means mitoch ahava yisera sha'ava ma'alav akasav tiyu nischatina, because he had such great love for her. The Torah calls them married, but they weren't really married. So the Gemara says, so Amarle Ravina Ravashi. So we'll go back to the question then. Is a Kohen allowed to marry, if a Kohen is a Mitzua Daka, is he allowed to marry a Nesina or a convert? Is he allowed to do it? So it says Ravina to Ravashi, Mitzua Daka Kushafra Mutar Begioros and Shakwaris. That a Mitzua Daka and a Kushafra can marry a convert and a woman who is a freed slave. Habenesina Assyri, which proves that if it would be a Canaanite to be prohibited. Amalei or Tamech. But from the end of the Mishnah, it says, they're only prohibited to people who are allowed to come into the community. So from the end, it seems like a Nesina is allowed. So we can't bring a proof from there. Okay, the next Mishnah states, Ammoni Moavi Asurim Isur Nisur that the Ammoni and the Moavi, the Ammonites and the Moabite nations, are prohibited to marry into the community, and their prohibition is forever. Avon the Kevosayem Mutaros. But their females are permitted. But the female Ammonites and Moabites, as we're going to see from Ruth in the less than 2 weeks, the holiday of Shavuos, the female Moabites are permitted immediately. Mitri v'Adomi, the Mitri and the Edomites, Einam Asurim Ela Ad Shlosh Doros. They're only prohibited 3 generations after the fact. Echad Zacharim v'Echad Nekevos, whether males or females. Rabbi Shimon Matiras and Nekevos miyad. Rabbi Shimon allows the females immediately by the Egyptian and the Edomites. And his argument is as follows. Rabbi Shimon Kal V'chomer Advarim. He says, Ma b'makom she'asur Zacharim, i.e. by the Ammonites and Moabites, Yisrael, and they're prohibited forever. Heteros and Nekevos miyad. The women are immediately allowed. Makom she'asur Zacharim el Shlosh Doros, by the Egyptians, where the males are only prohibited for 3 generations. For sure, the girls or the females should be allowed immediately. Amrlos, they said to him, if it's halacha nikapa, we're going to accept it from you. Meaning, if you have a tradition, we'll accept it. But if you're just making a logical argument, yesh tshuva. Then we have a response here. The Gemara is going to tell us their response. Amar Lahem, he said no. Ki halacha ani omer. He said, first of all, I have a response to you. To block your logic, but nevertheless, I'm telling you the halacha. So, Minan Emilia, how do we know this idea? That the female Moabites and the female Ammonites are allowed to marry into the Jewish people, but not the males. Rabbi Yochanan Makra, verse tells us when David was going out to fight Goliath, Kirosh Shaul as David Yotzei Lekras Hapushti, when Saul saw David going out to fight Goliath. Amar, he said, "Al Avner Saratzavav Ben Mizanar." He said, "Who is this boy?" Avner. Vayomer Avner Chaynav Shacham Melchem Yadati. And Avner says, "I have no idea who he is." Where it says, "How can they not know who David is?" The Lo Yadoi, they didn't know David. Vaksiva Ish B'Meiza Lo Yadoi Vaksiva Yavu Ma'od. You don't know Sekilim. David was Saul's armor bearer. El Avu Kamasha. They're asking about David's father. The Gemara says, "Can't be." But did they not know who David's father was? David. David's father Yishai was a huge general. Of course, Saul knew who he was. So Shaul wants to know. He wants to know if he came from Peretz. Some of the commentaries say that from Peretz mean he came from the first drop of seed, or he came from the second drop. If he was from Peretz, then he would be like a king. then David would be a king. Shamelch poretz lasos derech. The king can break through the path to make a road. You're not how to stop him. So it's a play on the word peretz. And if you're saying it's from Zerach, chashivi ba'al me'av. He's just a nice, distinguished person. So my timer. So the Gemara says my timer amarei. Because my time amarei sha'al away. What's the reasoning that they were so suspicious? What's the reason that Shaul was suspicious as to who David was? Because it says Vayobah Shaul as David Madav, that Shaul dressed as David goes out to fight Goliath. Shaul dressed him in his armor, which means Kamida so. That Saul's armor fit David, which was an impossibility because Shaul was very tall and David was short, and yet Saul's armor fit David. So he says, what's going on here? So Amalei Doeg Odomi, so Doeg the Edomite says, before you ask about Saul, about David, if he could be king, Shaul of him ask if he's even allowed to marry a Jew. And my time at the costume he comes from a Moabite, Ruth. Amalei Abner said, Tanina, we have a tradition. Ammoni v'o Ammonis, Moavi v'o Moavis. He says we have a tradition. Only the males are excluded, not the females. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, well, it says you can't marry a mamzer. Does that mean only a male mamzer? They're really going after David's lineage. You know what it's like? It's like the birthers challenging like Obama's lineage, or people like, seriously, this is what it is. You go after the king, and they want to say he's not really able to come into the community. So no, but a mamzer, it says ksum mumzar, it includes any blemish, and even a woman. So the Gemara says, mitri v'lo mitris. You want to say only a male Egyptian, not a female Egyptian? Say no. Shani achad the mefarish time of the Quran. No, the reason why we say it's only a male Moabite and not a female is because we explain the verse. Because the verse says, can't marry a Moabite and Ammoni because they didn't bring you bread and water. Only a man brings out the water. That was a practice, go out into the wilderness, but not a woman. Mar says, well, so he said you could have got the man to bring out the water to the men and the women to bring out the water to the women. So that was what Abner was stumped, ishtik. So he was quiet. So Mira at that point, it starts to get hairy. We'll continue this, God willing, tonight. We'll finish the rest of the story tonight. If anybody has any questions, obviously.